Hey everyone, Andreas Park here again with a little demo on programming in Excel with VBA. As I indicated before, we will be doing a little bit of programming in this class. This is the nature of trading, that you need to be able to do an algorithm, which basically means you have to automate a task. And for this purpose, we're using VBA. Now, this particular demo will be not at all about trading software. It's just to give you a sense of the basics of coding. Now, as before, we're going to go into Excel. We need to have the developer ribbon. So we click somewhere on the ribbon up here. We customize the ribbon. We make sure that we select the developer option. And then as we have the developer option open, we're going to activate Visual Basic, which I, in fact, actually already have. Now, when you work on a computer with coding, I highly recommend that you do two screens next to one another, one where you do your code and the other one where you see the output. And in Excel, the way it works is most of the output you will always see in Excel. So now what is it that we want to do? The very first thing is most of the things that we do when we deal with coding as as economists or as people doing finance, is we need to deal with some form of data. And Excel essentially is a big database. It's not a database, but it's a data sheet, right? Where it is organized by columns that are usually in Excel are in terms of numbers, in terms of letters, and rows which are measured in numbers. So the first thing that we need to know is we need to understand how you can refer to a particular cell, or how you can refer to a range of cells. Now in Excel, that is very straightforward, or in VBA, it's very straightforward. I'm going to just paste this over here. We usually refer to cells either by the command range or by the command cells. So here we see the command range, where we're looking at the range C2, which means the cell, for instance, which would be this button here. Let me quickly mark this with a yellow color so you know which one we're talking about. The other alternative with VBA is to refer to this particular point here as cells 2, 3. Well, 2, 3 would be rows, so it's row 2 and column 3. That's basically just the syntax. Syntax means the way it is normally done. Now, what we want to now do is we want to do a little bit of coding. I've indicated this in the last set of slides where you can do some so-called subroutines. They start usually with sub and then they end with end sub. And what I have here is a subroutine which I call refing, meaning for referencing. And all that I do is I put a command where I put something in a particular cell. Now, just one thing that you know, when you put the high comma is an inverted comma. If you put that in front of a line, the line is commented out, so it's basically just read as text that has no particular meaning. I recommend that you use this for your codes so that you can remind yourself what it is that you did. Now, this particular subroutine, what it does, it basically takes this cell and it puts an entry in there. So now, what I do now is I want to run the subroutines. There's various different ways how you can do this. You can go, for instance, into the normal Excel. You can go to developer, and then you can go to your codes. You can click here on the macros, and there's a number of macros that you have. You select the one that you want to do and you would run it. So for instance, the one that we have here is called refing. We got this in module 3 because I have something hidden there that you can't see. And if I were to run it, it would do an entry. So if I press this button here, it runs and it puts the text mine into that box, which is what I specify here. Now I can also do the same thing by simply referring to the cell as cells 2.3. And I change the text now to you wish. So if I were to mark this here and I want to run this code, there's another way to run it, which is as you go up here in this ribbon, you see that there is a little play button. So if I press this play button, now the moment I do this, the entry on the Excel spreadsheet will change, hopefully, to you wish. Now 1, 2, 3, press, and you can see it changes to you wish. So now this sounds completely trivial, and it is, of course, but the point here is that you need to learn of how you can refer to particular cell entries because you will use that later on in RIT. Okay, so next thing is and this is the more important thing, is when we think of coding, it's one thing to do something that, for instance, as an example before, that submits an order for me. What you really want though is that the system submits orders automatically. Automatically means that it does something when it should be doing something. Now, what that means is basically that you have to give it a series of commands that make it do something. Now, there is really two main ones that we care for and that comprise most of what you do in coding. The first one is that you run what's called a loop. A loop means that you're doing a certain task over and over and over again for a particular amount of time that you specify. The second type of tool that we use for controlling are conditional statements, where you say do something if something happens. The two, of course, are very strongly related, and we're going to start thinking, and we'll start talking about the particular types of loops first. Now, so let me just code over some text which I have from a different piece of software. Oops, that's didn't work as usual. The commands for copying and pasting are different on Macs and on Windows machines. So I have a little bit of text there. I'm gonna post this entire thing at a later stage, but as you can see, if I point over there, you can see that there is that Excel has several different forms of loops. In particular, there is the for each loop, which means that you essentially do something for a particular set of objects in a list. Then you can do something which is called do while, where you do something until a particular, as long as a condition holds. And then there's the one which is do until, which means that you do something until a particular condition holds, right? So there's a subtle difference between the two, and you can formulate usually multiple different, the same loop in multiple different ways. There's also the last one that we're interested in is a so-called for statement. A for statement is a very plain statement in which you have a particular counter that keeps counting to determine for you to do something. All of these are useful under different circumstances, and it really depends on what it is that you want to do to pick which one works. Oftentimes you can use one or the other. They can be interchangeable. Well, now I'm not a very experienced VBA coder. I'm just going to I can just tell you that you have to get a bit of a hang of this. Now, in principle, I don't want you to get into all of these details too much so that you are becoming an expert on VBA, because God forbid, then you would start coding in VBA. And as you know, I believe Excel is a cancer. So therefore, we shouldn't use it as much. But it's good to understand the detail, the principles well enough so you know how to automate a task. Okay, so what we want to now do is I want to very simply create an array of numbers here in my Excel spreadsheet in the cells from A1 to A10, and I want to have just a simple counter where you go from 1 to 10. Now, we all know that there's easier ways to do this in Excel than using a VBA function, but please bear with me because I want you to see what happens. All right, so we start with a while statement for this. Now, here's what we do. Let me copy the code over that we have. So we create a sequence of numbers. This is what we call it create sums, which is a do while on a do while loop. So now for that, there's a little thing that we need to know. So what we want to do is we want to put into the cell A1 here, I want to put a 1, the next one a 2, and so on and so forth until the cell A10 where I want to have the number 10. Okay, so now what I need to do for that is I want to say go through a particular routine, do something, which is write a number into these cells until you've reached this cell here. Okay, so now how do this? Well, I have a counter that I'm running. This is the counter I, which I set equal to 1 early on. And then I'm running through this, and I'm putting into the cell I, which is the row, in column 1, which is the column A, the value I, which is the number that I'm interested in. And so once I've done that, once I've put it into one cell, I have to move on to the next cell, which means I have to take my number and raise it by 1. So Now, one of the things I should say is that this, when I just run this subroutine, it would just happen in an instant. It goes very fast. So I put this line in here, which slows it down, so that you will be able to see this on the screen without me going and running it in slow motion. All right. So if you're wondering the code runs a little slow, it's because I deliberately slow it down. So let's run this particular subroutine. I'm going to press the play button, and what you will see now is in the Excel spreadsheet that there is numbers appearing. You can see this here, 4, 5, and so on and so forth, always with a delay of 1 second. You can see how these numbers are running, and now it has reached the 10th cell, and that's it. All right, well, that's very well, but now let's see, we can also do this, the same routine, with a different command. So now in the next stage, I'm going to run a routine where I do the do until function. So remember, do while means do something while a particular statement is true. So the while statement says my counter is smaller than 10. Now what we're going to do, we want to also fill an array. Now we're going to go here in the second column because, you know, it's the first column is already full. And we want to do the same thing, which is just create a counter. But we're doing this now, our condition will be you do this until you've reached the number 10 and then you stop. So you see this here is again a counter. The command now is do until. Do it until my counter exceeds 10. That's the last cell that I want. I use the equal sign, the greater sign. If I want to have a greater or equal, we need to add the equality sign behind it. And again, I'm just putting the value of I, this counter in, and I have this function here which slows everything down. So let me mark everything and play it. As you can see, slowly these numbers are filling up. See how it goes down, it counts. I know it counts down, it's a little painful in seconds, but here we are. All right. Now, we can also do this counter thing in an easier way. There is a function which is a so-called for function. I mentioned that earlier. And so now for that, we basically have a built-in counter. We're saying for the value I from 1 to the maximum number that we're interested in, which is 10. We're putting, and now we're going into the third column here. We're putting into each of these cells, we're going to put the value I. Now I'm going to quickly copy over the delay function because otherwise, again, this is going too slow. I know it's painfully slow now, but bear with me. So this is the same principle. We're going to accomplish the same thing with the same, also with a particular line of code. So here we go. Now, computationally, usually for loops are easier than another loop because a for loop is easier to check than another loop, than the while loop, because it's just, I don't know, one less point to check. But let's just not go into the details of that. So let me run this code. And now you can see how in the third column, my numbers are all appearing. Now I know this is very boring and this is the same thing over and over, but I'm trying to demonstrate to you though that there are different options that you have. Now finally, what we can also do is you can use something which is a for each function. And that's actually a pretty cool feature of VBA because it recognizes that you have to do something, that there are objects that have a particular type of property. So when I have an object, for instance, you can think of a cell. A cell is an object. You can also have, because we're in Excel, you can think of a worksheet that is also an object. So there is, you can have a particular file. There's various different ways how you can have objects, I mean, the items that are similar. So what do we do in this subroutine? Well, in this one is, again, we have a counter because we need a counter for the cell value that we're looking at. But we're going we're going for each of the cells in a range. Now, this brings me back to before I mentioned that you can refer to a particular point in Excel as either with using the range command here. So range C2 is this yellow spot, or you can refer to it as by numerical counting of the number of rows and columns. So rows and the columns. Yeah. So now what we're doing is, but one of the nice things is a range in Excel is usually defined by numeric, so alphanumeric and numeric number, colon, alphanumeric and numeric number. So we have, for instance, here we have the cell, let's go, we have it for B here, let's do the cell D, and we're going to put my little delay function in here too. And so what I do is now is I run through the same loop and add my numbers into this column over here, as long as I run through the cells in this particular range. All right, so let me just run this so you can see how it works. And here we go, it slowly runs through the various different cells. And there we go. Painfully slow, I know. This is the speed at which computers in my youth would work. I know, when dinosaurs still roamed the planet. All right. Now, so that basically gives you the idea of how to deal with loops. Now, the next thing is we want to do is we want to now go on and talk about conditional statements. And so for that, we have a very simple check. So I'm going to have a routine, which I'm just going to quickly copy paste over here. Hold on. Here we go. So this is just a simple if check, and it basically just says that if the value in cell A2 here is larger than 0, then I put, and I'm going to put this into F2, I'm going to put here, and I put a new entry in which says that it is positive. Now, we can quickly run this check and just run this subroutine, and you would see immediately as it runs that it makes this check. And you can see, because of course this number here in A2 is positive, it indicates it as positive. Now, you see that here, one of the things I did is I have behind range, I have this little extension here which says dot value, and the same here as dot value, which just means that you change the value in the cell. That is actually oftentimes not necessary. I wrote down the same routine down here, where I basically eliminated the number value, and I'm just going to just add positive. And if I run this routine to do the same check, you'll see that the term here, blah, which comes from me just trying something out, will be changed to positive. So I'm going to run the routine now, and as you can see, the check checks out, and it changes this entry here to positive. All right, now let's see if we can do something where we run a routine, which is a loop, where we do a check along the way. So let me copy paste over another routine that I have created. And so now this is a routine which does a if and for check. So here's what I do. I run through all of the entries in this first column, and I check if the cell value is positive, then I'm going to put in one column which I said, let's say I put this 6 out. So this is from this particular column where we're at. We're moving 6 over, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it should appear in this column. There should be every time the value checks out. So every time the value here is positive, then it should say here that the value is positive. Let me just run this subroutine so you can see how this works. This is now without a delay, but you can see how all of these values are, of course, because they're positive, they're all changed to positive. So what you have here is you basically run through all of the cells, and instead of doing a command, you're doing a check on each of these cells to see if something is true, and if something is true, then you do something. All right, now finally, let's do something which is slightly more complex, which is this. Like if you have an if statement, that's all very well, but you know, what would you do if the statement is not true, right? So then do you just leave it as it is? Well, there are commands for that in particular. So there is a standard statement, which is an if statement. Then you can also have a so-called else if statement. So that means that if one thing is not true, let's move on to the next check and check if that one is true. Then alternative, another way to look at it is if the first statement is not true, then do something else. So how do I express this best? The first statement here, if, is just a normal check. The next one here checks if something else is true. Now, if this one would be not here, and I would move straight to the else statement, then it just means that this is what you do by default. So let's look at this code here. Again, I'm running through all of these entries in the first column. And I want to put into the 7 offset part, which is, so this would be column H, I'm going to put some extra statements. So for instance, I check if the value of the cell is larger than 8, then I will say that this is a value which is greater than 8. If it is smaller than 3, I make a statement which says it's smaller than 3. And if it's anything else, then I say I don't care. So this is because this may be something that I'm interested in this particular thing. So let's run the subroutine. And as I run the subroutine, I should see that there are entries here occurring. Now let me put the delay in again, just so that it's a little slower, not everything happens at the same time. Now, one thing is important. When you have a for each statement, or when you have a for statement, you need to tell the routine when it's over, when it's done. The way you do this is you have at the very end, you have the statement which says next. Next means you make the counter and you move on to one further. So when you run through objects, you move on to the next object. If you do the same thing for a counter, which is the one that we have, where's my for? This is the simple part here, where basically you just count all the cells. Then you just basically say next I, which means you just increase the counter for I by 1. All right, so long story short, we're running through all of these entries here and we're making a check whether or not they are smaller than 3, larger than 8, and if none of this is true, we just say we don't care. All right, let me run this code. See, the first number is smaller than 3, does the check quickly, doesn't care, and now we have 9 and 10, and here comes the result. And there you have it. So that gives you an indication of the basic commands that exist if you want to run through VBA commands. It's very easy to find more out if you want. You can go online and you just check for common VBA commands. There's usually libraries that explain all the available commands quite clearly. For the purpose of this class, most of what we will do will be for statements, if statements, while statements of this kind. So, but now you see how you can do this, and in the next class, I hope this will turn out to be something useful. So thank you for listening.